Dubai, the city of dreams, a sprawling desert paradise glittering with unimaginable wealth and towering ambitions. Beneath its shimmering facade lies a tale so chilling, so steeped in betrayal and power, that it forces you to question the very foundations of trust and love. But let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered that the person you trusted the most had a secret so dark, it could shatter everything you knew? By the end of this story, you'll have your answer, but only if you stay with us till the end. Amira, a 28-year-old woman, was the embodiment of grace and poise. With her striking almond-shaped eyes framed by long lashes, a soft smile that masked years of silent endurance, and a sense of elegance that turned heads wherever she went, Amira appeared to have it all. She was married to Zain, a wealthy businessman with deep ties to the Middle East. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple, living in one of Dubai's most opulent neighborhoods. Their home, a modern palace overlooking the marina, was a testament to their success. A sprawling villa adorned with crystal chandeliers, Italian marble, and a view that captured the breathtaking Dubai skyline. But behind the walls of their glittering life lay a void. Amira's marriage, though seemingly perfect, was marred by emotional neglect. Zain, consumed by his relentless ambition, spent more time in boardrooms than at home. Amira's days were filled with charity events, high-profile galas, and managing the household, but the nights were a different story. They were silent, cold, and lonely. She often found herself staring at the vast expanse of the city from her balcony, wondering if this was all her life would ever be, a picture-perfect facade, hiding the cracks within. The turning point came at one such gala, a charity fundraiser hosted by Dubai's elite. It was an event designed to showcase wealth and influence, attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and business tycoons. Amira, dressed in an exquisite emerald gown that perfectly complemented her deep brown eyes, was the center of attention. But her husband, as always, was too preoccupied to notice. While Zain mingled with potential investors, Amira wandered into the Sheikh's private garden, a lush sanctuary of rare flowers and cascading fountains, illuminated by soft golden lights. It was there that she met him, Sheikh Omar al-Rashid. Omar was a man whose presence could silence a room. Tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing grey eyes that seemed to see through one's soul, he exuded an aura of power and magnetism. His voice, deep and commanding, had the ability to make anyone stop and listen. Their first conversation was brief yet unforgettable, a discussion about the rare orchids in the garden. But it wasn't the conversation that lingered in Amira's mind. It was the way he looked at her, as though she was the only person in the world. For the first time in years, she felt seen. In the days that followed, fate seemed to conspire to bring them together. They ran into each other at another event, then at a private art gallery opening. Each encounter felt serendipitous, yet the tension between them was undeniable. Omar's charm and attentiveness stood in stark contrast to Zain's distant demeanor. He had a way of making her feel special, of listening to her dreams and fears in a way no one else ever had. Amira, who had always prided herself on her loyalty, found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain or resist. Their affair began innocently enough, long conversations over coffee, shared laughter, and stolen glances. But as their connection deepened, so did the risks. Omar, with his vast wealth and influence, had his own secrets. His world was one of luxury and control, where loyalty was bought and betrayal was punished. For Amira, it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. She found herself living a double life, one as the dutiful wife of a businessman and the other as the lover of a sheikh. The cracks in her perfect life began to show when Zain started noticing changes in her behavior. She was more distracted, often lost in thought. One evening, as she prepared to leave for what she claimed was a charity meeting, Zain stopped her. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his suspicion. "Amira," he said, "is there something you're not telling me?" Her heart raced, but she managed to deny it, brushing off his concerns with practiced ease. Yet, the confrontation left her shaken. The warnings started soon after. It began with a black SUV she noticed trailing her car as she drove to meet Omar. Then came the anonymous letters, slipped under her door, warning her to end the affair. Amira dismissed them at first, but the unease grew. Who was watching her? And how much did they know? Omar, when she told him about the letters, brushed it off with a reassuring smile. "No one would dare threaten you," he said. But his confidence did little to ease her fears. Then came the phone call, a distorted voice on the other end of the line that sent chills down her spine. "Stay away from him," the voice warned, "or you'll regret it." Amira's hands trembled as she hung up, her mind racing with questions. Was it Zayn, a jealous rival of Omar's, or someone else entirely? The once thrilling affair was quickly becoming a dangerous game. The turning point came on a stormy night, when Amira found herself alone at Omar's estate. The mansion, usually bustling with staff, was eerily quiet. Omar had left her in the sitting room, saying he had to take an important call. Hours passed, and Amira's unease grew. The rain lashed against the windows as she wandered through the dimly lit halls, her footsteps echoing in the silence. And then she heard it, a muffled argument, followed by the sound of glass shattering. Her heart pounded as she approached the source of the commotion, but before she could investigate further, Omar appeared, his expression dark and unreadable. "Go home," he said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "I'll explain everything later." Confused and frightened, Amira obeyed, but the events of that night haunted her. Little did she know, that was only the beginning. The secrets she was about to uncover would drag her into a web of lies, betrayal, and murder, a web that would leave no one untouched. As Amira drove home that night, the events at Omar's estate replayed in her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't shake. The muffled argument, the shattering glass, and Omar's cold, dismissive tone. It all felt wrong. Who was he arguing with? And why had he been so desperate to send her away? Her thoughts spiraled into paranoia as she pulled into her driveway. But before she could even step inside, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake. Leave now, or it will be too late." Her blood ran cold. The words on the screen felt like a noose tightening around her neck. For the first time, Amira realized the gravity of her choices. She wasn't just risking her marriage. She was entangled in something far darker, something she couldn't fully understand. But curiosity and her growing attachment to Omar outweighed her fear. She decided to confront him the next day, demanding answers to the questions that now plagued her. The following afternoon, Amira arrived at Omar's estate under the guise of calm, though her heart was anything but steady. Omar greeted her with his usual charm, but she could see the tension in his eyes. "What happened last night?" she asked, her voice firm. Omar hesitated for a moment before offering a vague explanation about a business dispute. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he assured her. But Amira wasn't convinced. For the first time, she felt a crack in the armor of the man she thought she knew. Omar's world began to reveal its darker edges over the next few weeks. Amira noticed subtle but unsettling changes in his behavior. He became more secretive, often taking calls in another room or abruptly cutting their meetings short. At the same time, the threats against her escalated. One evening, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph of her and Omar at a cafe, laughing. Scrawled across it in red ink were the words, "He can't save you." Terrified, Amira confronted Omar again, this time with a photograph in hand. His reaction was swift and fierce. "Who gave this to you?" he demanded, his voice laced with anger. When she told him she didn't know, he promised to handle it. But his assurances did little to ease her growing fear. Deep down, Amira knew she was in over her head. As the days passed, the strain began to take a toll on her. She became withdrawn, her once radiant smile replaced by a haunted expression. Zayn, oblivious to the affair but aware that something was wrong, tried to comfort her. "You can tell me anything," he said one evening, his tone unusually tender. For a brief moment, Amira considered confessing everything. But the thought of losing both Zayn and Omar, of unraveling her carefully constructed life, kept her silent. Then, one night, everything changed. Amira received a panicked call from Omar. His voice, usually so composed, was trembling. "You need to come here now," he said. "There's something you need to see." Despite her better judgment, Amira agreed. She arrived at his estate to find the mansion eerily quiet, the staff conspicuously absent. Omar led her to his study, where a laptop sat open on the desk. On the screen was a grainy video feed of what appeared to be the interior of her home. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising with panic. Omar's explanation was chilling. Someone had been monitoring her for weeks, tracking her every move. "I don't know who it is," he admitted, "but they're dangerous. You need to stay here tonight. It's not safe for you to go back." The revelation left Amira shaken. She spent the night in one of the guest rooms, unable to sleep as the weight of her situation pressed down on her. The next morning, she awoke to find Omar gone. A note on the bedside table instructed her to stay put and wait for him to return. But as the hours dragged on, her unease grew. She decided to search the estate, hoping to find answers. In Omar's study, she stumbled upon a locked drawer. Unable to resist, she searched the room until she found the key. Inside were documents that painted a chilling picture: bank statements, property deeds, and photographs that suggested Omar's wealth wasn't entirely legitimate. There were also dossiers on several people, including Zayn. Amira's heart sank as she realized the depth of Omar's manipulation. She wasn't just a lover. She was a pawn in a much larger game. Before she could process the discovery, she heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, she quickly returned everything to its place and pretended to be reading a book when Omar entered the room. He was composed, but there was an edge to his demeanor. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face. Amira nodded, forcing a smile, but her mind was racing. She knew she couldn't trust him, but leaving wasn't an option, not yet. Over the next few days, Omar's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours, returning with vague explanations and a growing sense of paranoia. One night, while they were having dinner, he revealed that he suspected someone close to him was behind the threats. "It's someone who wants to destroy me," he said, his voice heavy with anger. "And they'll use anyone, anything, to do it." Amira wanted to believe him, but her discovery in the study had planted seeds of doubt. Who was Omar, really? And what had she gotten herself into? The answers would come sooner than she expected, but they would bring with them a truth more horrifying than she could have imagined. The night that changed everything began with a storm. Lightning streaked across the sky as rain battered the windows of Omar's estate. Amira sat alone in the study, her nerves frayed from weeks of fear and suspicion. Omar had been gone all day, and the silence of the house felt oppressive. Just as she was about to retreat to her room, her phone buzzed. The message from an unknown number read, "Tonight everything ends." Amira froze, her hands trembling as she stared at the screen. Before she could make sense of the message, the power in the house flickered and went out. Panic surged through her as the once grand estate plunged into darkness. She grabbed her phone and used its flashlight to navigate the halls. Her first instinct was to call Omar, but when she dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. Alone and terrified, she decided to head for the front door and leave. But as she reached the foyer, she heard it, a muffled scream coming from upstairs. Her heart pounded as she hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the need to find out what was happening. Summoning her courage, she climbed the grand staircase, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The scream came again, this time louder, leading her to a door at the end of the hallway. She hesitated before pushing it open, revealing a scene that would haunt her forever. Omar was there, his hands stained with blood, standing over a lifeless body. The man on the floor was unrecognizable, his face beaten beyond recognition. Omar's expression was a mix of rage and despair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to Amira, his eyes wild. "I had no choice," he said, his voice shaking. "He was going to destroy us." Amira felt the room spin as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. "Who is he?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Omar didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm and pulled her into the room, shutting the door behind them. "You can't tell anyone about this," he said urgently. "If they find out, it's over, for both of us." Amira wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed by fear. She glanced at the body on the floor, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? And what had he done to provoke Omar's wrath? But before she could ask, Omar began issuing instructions. "Help me clean this up," he said. "We don't have much time." Numb with shock, Amira obeyed. Together, they worked in silence, wiping away the blood and wrapping the body in a heavy rug. Omar's calm efficiency was chilling, and Amira couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. Once the body was concealed, Omar carried it out to his car, instructing Amira to stay behind. "I'll take care of this," he said. "Don't leave the house. And don't answer any calls." As soon as he was gone, Amira collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. She had always known that Omar's world was dangerous, but she had never imagined it would come to this. She wanted to call the police, to confess everything, but she knew that doing so would implicate her as well. She was trapped, caught in a nightmare of her own making. The next morning, Omar returned, his demeanor eerily calm. He assured Amira that everything had been taken care of and that there was no evidence linking them to the crime. But his reassurance did little to ease her growing paranoia. Everywhere she went, she felt as though she was being watched. The messages from the unknown number continued, each one more menacing than the last. One read, "You think it's over, but it's just beginning." The tension reached a breaking point when the police arrived at her home a week later. They were investigating the disappearance of a prominent businessman who had last been seen at Omar's estate. Amira's heart raced as she answered their questions, carefully avoiding any mention of that fateful night. But as the investigation intensified, she realized that the walls were closing in. The final blow came when she discovered a hidden folder on Omar's laptop. Inside were files detailing every aspect of her life, her schedule, her conversations, even her private moments. It became clear that Omar had been monitoring her from the beginning, manipulating her into becoming a pawn in his schemes. The man she had thought of as her savior was, in fact, her captor. Desperate and out of options, Amira made a decision. She contacted the police and offered to tell them everything in exchange for protection. It was a risky move, but she knew it was her only chance to escape. The following day, she met with detectives and recounted the events leading up to the murder, omitting her own involvement in disposing of the body. The police launched a raid on Omar's estate, uncovering evidence of not just the murder, but a web of illegal activities that tied him to corruption, smuggling, and even human trafficking. Omar was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including the murder of the businessman. But his influence ran deep, and Amira knew that testifying against him would put her life in danger. The trial was a media spectacle, with every detail of their affair and the murder splashed across headlines. Amira's testimony was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, but it came at a cost. She lost everything: her marriage, her reputation, and her sense of security. As she sat in the courtroom, facing the man who had once made her feel alive, she realized the full extent of her choices. Omar's piercing gaze never left her, a silent reminder of the power he still held. But as the judge delivered the guilty verdict, Amira felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, she was free. The verdict was in. Omar al-Rashid was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers, but Amira sat still, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. Relief, guilt, and a lingering sense of fear all swirled within her. She had done what she believed was right, but the cost was monumental. As Omar was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met hers one last time, sending a chill down her spine. It wasn't over. Not for her. In the days following the trial, Amira found herself in a state of limbo. The media frenzy surrounding the case showed no signs of dying down. Paparazzi camped outside her new, modest apartment, eager for a glimpse of the woman at the center of the scandal. News channels replayed clips of her testimony, dissecting her every word and gesture. She had become a symbol of both betrayal and bravery, depending on who you asked. But Amira knew the truth. She wasn't a hero. She was a woman who had made a series of terrible choices and was now paying the price. Despite the public scrutiny, she tried to rebuild her life. She enrolled in therapy, hoping to make sense of everything she had endured. Her sessions became a refuge, a place where she could finally confront the choices that had led her down such a dark path. But the process was far from easy. Each night, she was haunted by nightmares of that fateful evening. The lifeless body, the blood on Omar's hands, and the chilling realization that she had been complicit in covering up a murder. The threats didn't stop, either. Though Omar was behind bars, his network remained intact. Anonymous messages continued to flood her phone, each one more menacing than the last. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning," one read. Amira reported the threats to the authorities, but their resources were stretched thin. She was advised to remain vigilant, to avoid familiar routines, and to keep a low profile. One evening, as she was returning home from a late therapy session, she noticed a car following her. Her pulse quickened as she tried to lose it, weaving through the narrow streets of her neighborhood. When she finally arrived at her apartment, the car was gone, but her sense of unease remained. She double-checked the locks on her doors and windows, but sleep eluded her that night. The following morning, a package arrived at her doorstep. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside, she found a single item, a photograph of her and Zayn from their wedding day, torn down the middle. On the back was a chilling message: "You'll never escape your past." Amira's hands shook as she stared at the photo. The threats were becoming more personal, more targeted. She realized that someone was determined to ensure she paid for her involvement with Omar, even if it meant taking matters into their own hands. For the first time, she considered leaving Dubai altogether. But where would she go? And would it even be enough to keep her safe? As the weeks turned into months, Amira tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy. She started volunteering at a local women's shelter, hoping to find purpose in helping others. She told herself that this was her way of atoning for her mistakes, of turning her pain into something meaningful. But no matter how hard she tried to move forward, The shadows of her past loomed large. One day, as she was organizing donations at the shelter, she received a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. "We're closer than you think." The line went dead before she could respond. Amira dropped the phone, her mind racing. The threats were no longer just an abstract fear. They were a looming reality. Desperate, she reached out to the authorities once again, but their response was the same. Without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Feeling helpless, Amira turned to Zain, the one person she had hurt the most but who might still care enough to help. She hadn't spoken to him since the trial, but she hoped that he would understand the danger she was in. When Zain answered her call, his voice was cold but controlled. "What do you want, Amira?" he asked. She explained everything. The threats, the photograph, the mysterious package. To her surprise, Zain agreed to meet her. When they sat down at a quiet cafe, she saw a flicker of concern in his eyes, though it was quickly masked by his usual stoicism. "You brought this on yourself," he said bluntly. "But if you're in danger, I'll do what I can to help." For the first time in months, Amira felt a glimmer of hope. Zain's connections ran deep, and she knew that he had the resources to protect her in ways the authorities couldn't. Under Zain's guidance, Amira changed her phone number, moved to a new apartment, and adopted an entirely new routine. For a while, it seemed to work. The threats stopped, and she began to breathe a little easier. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as she was returning home, she found a single rose taped to her door. Attached was a note that read, "We never forget." The message was clear. No matter how far she ran, her past would always catch up with her. Amira realized that she couldn't spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. If she wanted to truly escape, she would have to confront the lingering shadows head-on. Her decision was both bold and dangerous. Amira began gathering evidence against Omar's remaining associates, determined to dismantle the network that had enabled his crimes. It was a risky move, one that put her life in even greater jeopardy. But she knew that this was the only way to find true freedom. In the end, her efforts paid off. With the help of Zain and a small team of investigators, Amira exposed a web of corruption that spanned continents. Several of Omar's closest allies were arrested, and his empire began to crumble. The threats stopped, and for the first time in years, Amira felt a sense of closure. But the scars remained. Amira knew that she could never undo the choices she had made, nor could she forget the pain she had caused. All she could do was move forward, one day at a time, and hope that her story would serve as a cautionary tale. This story isn't just about betrayal and murder. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of our choices. Amira's journey teaches us that no matter how far we fall, redemption is always possible, but it comes at a price. If you've been captivated by this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's reflect on the power of love, the danger of secrets, and the resilience of the human spirit.